Havana, Cuba, CNN. Despite the often empty supermarkets and antagonistic relations with the communist-run government, Cuba offered U.S. diplomats a rare benefit for years: it was safe. Unlike in many other countries, in Cuba, U.S. Embassy employees didn't have to worry much about terrorist attacks, kidnapping or even petty crime. The Cuban government's tight control over the island made Havana one of the safest cities in the world. Diplomats, especially those Cuba suspected of being spies, might suffer harassment at the hands of the powerful state security apparatus, but there were established lines neither of the Cold War adversaries would cross. But starting early this year, U.S. diplomats heading to the island to begin their postings were quietly warned they could face a mysterious threat that was causing American Foreign Service officers to fall ill, some with long-lasting symptoms. At least 21 U.S. diplomats and family members have been affected by the incidents that began in November, causing a baffling array of maladies from hearing loss to dizziness to concussions. U.S. officials say there may have been as many as 50 attacks, a senior U.S. official told CNN, the most recent in August. Some diplomats were targeted multiple times, the official said. Investigators haven't determined the cause of the incidents, but U.S. officials told CNN they are convinced someone has targeted American diplomats in Havana with a sophisticated device never deployed before, at least not against U.S. personnel. At the United Nations on Friday, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Perea denied that Cuba was involved in attacks on diplomats and said the United States was politicizing the incidents. But 7 months after complaints to Cuban officials and assurances from Cuban President Raúl Castro that the incidents would be investigated, U.S. officials are frustrated by the lack of progress and may scale back the embassy to limit the number of people who risk exposure. Options include sending families and non-essential staff back to the United States to a full-on shuttering of the embassy, 3 senior U.S. officials told CNN. "We have to consider it. We thought we had corralled this, and then the 2 cases in August took place," a senior U.S. official said. "It is not as if the attacks address individual personnel officers. Our personnel is broadly at risk. So we have to consider next steps because we need to protect our people. If the United States were to recall diplomats, it would be a devastating setback to U.S.-Cuban relations and come at a crucial moment as Castro prepares to step down as president in February and Washington needs eyes and ears on the ground. Ties between the countries were severed in 1961 shortly after Fidel Castro took power. As confrontation between the 2 nations loomed, U.S. diplomats hurriedly lowered the American flag at the embassy and boarded a ferry to sail across the Straits of Florida. In 1977, the United States and Cuba took the first step toward restoring diplomatic relations by opening interests sections in each other's capitals, and U.S. diplomats moved back into their seafront offices. They were hardly welcomed back with open arms. Then President Fidel Castro called the interests section a nest of spies and led frequent demonstrations in front of the building. "Surveillance was pretty constant," said Vicki Huddleston, who headed the interests section from 1999 to 2002. "The security officer used to say we don't even look for listening devices in the residence because the Cubans will just replace them. But it was not malicious. They just wanted to know what I was saying or other diplomats are saying." In 2015, after President Barack Obama announced a thaw in relations, the 2 countries re-established full diplomatic relations and reopened embassies. Some hardliners in Cuba, including the now-retired Fidel Castro, criticized the opening with the United States, but many Cubans rejoiced as Americans returned to the island in large numbers for the first time in a half-century. The normalizing relationship led to restored flight services and greater exchanges between the 2 countries. But in November, following the U.S. presidential election, American diplomats began to experience a series of strange incidents. As CNN first reported in August, diplomats were awoken late at night in their homes feeling unwell and hearing sounds that resembled insects or metal dragging across the floor. They were unable to determine the source of the sound. By leaving the room or area they were in, the incidents stopped immediately, two U.S. government officials said. By February, the State Department had concluded their diplomats were the targets of a campaign of harassment and they needed to raise the issue with Cuban officials. The devices used in the incidents had never been found, two U.S. officials said, but appeared to be a type of sonic weapon that emitted sound waves capable of inflicting physical harm. But the fuzzy,